All right, thanks, Wendy, and a good afternoon to everyone out there. I'm Tony Bergantino, Director of the Wyoming State Climate Office, the Water Resources Data System, and I'd like to welcome you to the August webinar, which is coming to you from my office, along with the University of Wyoming Extension and USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub. Along with us is the U.S. Geological Survey, the Wyoming State Engineers Office. We have Bureau of Land Management, and this month we have a twofer with people presenting from the National Weather Service offices in both Cheyenne and Riverton. So today, as usual, we'll go over current drought, climate conditions, surface water situation, water rights administration, weather forecasts, wildland fire update, and then we've got a special presentation from the National Weather Service on their new drought information statements product. So to start, we have another rather ugly looking map this month again. There was no real one spot in the state that was singled out, and degradations took place to varying levels in the north, south, east, west. As far as intensity, the worst would be the introduction of the D2 or severe drought that's up in there in the northwest, along with a large expansion of it there in the east. In the northeast corner there, up in Crook County, was the introduction of two category degradation that took place since the last webinar. But fortunately, there was a bit of improvement thanks to the August precipitation that we've seen so far that saw the removal of severe drought, that D2, along with a larger area of moderate drought, or D1, in the southeast. And those areas are outlined in green, which was a one category improvement. And then the dark green actually saw two categories of improvement since the last webinar. Look at drought last year compared to where we are this year. Not much to dwell on here, except for that area of Sweetwater, Carbon County border area. There's every place depicted this year is worse than where it was last year, when 99.8% of the state was clear, and there was only a small area that abnormally dry up there in Teton County, which was technically not drought present. Go into the timelines here, hopefully. So again, the history of drought levels starting at the turn of the century, 2000, which was the formation of the drought monitor. And you can see levels of moderate drought and abnormally dry conditions increasing there on the far right of the chart. And if you squint, you can even see that uptick in the D2 or severe drought that we've been seeing over the last few weeks. Presently, 96.38% of the state is covered by one of the D categories, and that is up 4 2/3% from the last webinar, unfortunately. The area covered by actual drought, that's that D1 through D4 categories, is now at a little over 54.5%, 54.6 to be exact, which is up almost 8.5% from the last time we met. And zoom in to see those increases a little bit better. This is again showing from 2020. We're down to just over 3.6% of the state having no D category at all, while the percentage of the state covered in D2 or severe drought has now jumped up to 18.84%. And that percentage was only at just under 2% during the last webinar that we had in July. So conditions continue to get worse. So now that we have, and this might be one of those little technical things that Wendy was mentioning. So now that we know what the current drought conditions are, it's been quite a while since we've gone over the process by which this map is created. So I was going to spend a little more time on that here. I mentioned it before, but the U.S. Drought Monitor became operational in 2000. And at the time, input was primarily from my office, with occasional input, sometimes solicited, sometimes volunteered by other entities from around the state. But fast forward about 20 years to June of 2020, a more formal working group was established to gather input from around the state. And this was in response to conditions that were worsening at the time as we moved into that last drought period, that longer hump that you saw on the previous slide. And so the Wyoming Conditions Monitoring Team, or WCMT for short, was formed. That WCMT is comprised of representatives from several agencies, entities around the state, and I think I've listed most of them on here. If there's any omissions, it's in no way intentional. Some of the more visible tasks or functions of this group are, well, the webinar that we're having today is one of them, along with the Wyoming Drought page that Wendy mentioned earlier, where the webinars will be posted. The team helps compile reports of conditions around the state, as well as review the initial suggestions for changes to the U.S. Drought Monitor. And the group looks at conditions on both sides of the spectrum, wet and dry. So we consider flooding as well as drought, but obviously the more prevalent side that the attention is on is the drought side. So on to the makeup of the map itself. It's authored each week by someone from the National Drought Mitigation Center, from NOAA, or the U.S. Department of Agriculture. As I mentioned, it was started in 2000, and in 2020 with the WCMT forming. Two additional people from Cheyenne, the Weather Service office there, have been making reservations and recommendations and helping out and taking the load. Those are Tony Anderson, who will be presenting shortly, and Mike Natoli, who has presented on several previous webinars. And I'm very grateful for their willingness to help with the recommendations, since we all need vacations from time to time. So just a thank you to them. So many factors are considered when we're looking at the recommendations, and it goes well beyond just precipitation. Some different factors carry more weight at different times of the year. So snowpack right now in the middle of summer isn't too helpful and is not taken into consideration, while stream flow in January equally carries relatively low weight. Data drive the monitor, but qualitative information is helpful. You know, when an area is if it's on the edge between conditions, some of that qualitative information, pictures, things like that can serve to either push it one way or the other, or prompt some more specific evaluation of an area to make a determination as to what categories should be there. The data are considered in terms of percentiles, not averages, but percentiles, since percentiles can give a much better indication of frequency or expectation of a particular set of conditions. It's also not just one particular index that determines if an area is at one level of drought or another. It's a consensus or convergence of the data that go into that determination. So if a consensus of indices are above the 30th percentile, no drought level exists. But once you get to that 21 to 30 percentile, then abnormally dry or D0 conditions come into play. And that's not technically drought. That's it's a heads up condition that this area is on the brink. It's either going in or coming out of a drought condition. If you get down to less than that second percentile, down to that ugly brown red color, then you could be looking at D4 or exceptional drought levels. And I'll steal a line here from Brian Fuchs, who's with the National Drought Mitigation Center. He's fond of saying, and it's very true, that he gets paid the same no matter what happens with the drought monitor. There's no incentives to add or remove drought, and in fact, if things stay the same, it's all the same. The goal is an accurate representation of conditions, not to put preference or anything one way or the other. It's to have the most accurate map out there, and that's what the drought monitor map prides itself on for the last more than 2 decades, is being that that depiction that you can rely on. So let's look at the actual steps that take place to create the weekly drought map. There's usually a 2-week rotating shift at the national level. So different national authors rotate every 2 weeks on the task of creating a map. They start out looking at data pretty much starting as soon as the map for the week is released. So the one that came out today, well, they're already starting to look at for the one that will be on Thursday. And they begin by overlaying various indices on the current drought map and seeing where changes might be necessary, and then begin creating their first draft. And the same thing happens at a more detailed scale in most of the states too, where Various entities peruse their own data and begin looking where changes are warranted. And this happens at varying scales in the states, with some states not being as active and some being very active. In Wyoming now, the analysis of conditions is done by the WCMT. So each morning put together what has become about a 26-page PDF showing about, well, there's well over 100 different maps depicting the different indices and at different time scales. And there's been an internal web page set up that depicts these and dozens of more for the use by the authors. And I've also been working on putting these maps into our Water and Climate Explorer, which I demoed here several months ago back. I think it was in October, and then again in either January or February with an update. The next release of the Explorer will have a majority of those maps in there, allowing anyone to overlay various time periods and indices. Most of the maps are in pairs to show what the same map looked like in the prior week. And then the state compiler for the week then goes through and marks up the current drought map with thoughts on areas, to improve or degrade. And the map and an explanation of why those changes were made is usually sent out by about 1 p.m. on Monday to the entire WCMT. Members of the group look at the proposed changes and either concur or make suggested variations. Those changes then get incorporated into a final draft map, which is then sent out to the team for one last look. And then a final recommendation is drafted and usually sent to the national author about 1 p.m. of the next day on Tuesday. And at that point, the national author now has three choices. He can accept the recs, he can reject them, or he can modify, and all three happen. I would say that most often the recommendations are accepted, but that's not always the case. The author may also have some additional changes, and those are communicated back to the Wyoming lead for discussion. The second most likely outcome is that part of the recommendations are accepted. So the author might feel that parts are not ready for change, but generally what we send in is of concurrence with what they're looking at. And they'll communicate that back to the lead, usually with some additional information as to why there was a disagreement. The least common is just outright rejection, again, with some information as to why, and that does happen too. In those last two situations, either modification or rejection, the Wyoming lead may bring this back to the team for further consideration, or if the justification is valid, accept the recommendations of the national author, or can choose to push back and look at it again. Like I say, again, both of those have happened. It's not as frequent now, but I think it did occur more often earlier in the monitor's history. Part of this was owing to snow dynamics and the precipitation in the form of snow is potential runoff whose benefit may not fully be realized right after it falls. So you don't want to be too over optimistic with a snowfall when you're not sure how much benefit that water will produce a few months later in the spring. So I guess this is what you would call the cliff notes of the process as it takes place in Wyoming. For additional information, you can check out the links here. And these will be on the slide deck when it's posted, as Wendy mentioned, so you won't have to scramble to write these down right now. So let's look at a few more of those maps that I just mentioned and how they're used. Here's the precipitation for the last 2 weeks, which has been mostly above median, especially down there in the southeast. A few scattered areas in north central, northeast Wyoming that are a bit below the median, but otherwise a lot of those green, blue, and even purple colors on the 2-week map, which is what we like to see. At 90 days, precipitation doesn't look nearly as good. The exception being Laramie County and central Albany County, which did see a bit of above median precipitation. The northwest and northeast stand out as the poorest of the areas, with large portions of those areas receiving below the 5th percentile over the last 90 days. And those are the areas that saw the major expansions of drought over the last 2 or 3 weeks. That's where that D2 or severe drought is currently sitting. So just like last month, when we look further into water and calendar year precipitation, the water year there on the left and the calendar year there on the right, they start to look more and more similar. So don't really have too much more to say on this other than just that A bit more widespread precipitation for the calendar year down there in Carbon and Albany counties, a little bit less in Fremont and Park counties for the calendar year versus the water year. So going to the Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, or the SPEI, widespread above average wetness for much of the state, but also some dryness there in the Northeast at the 30-day time frame, which is there on the upper left. At 60 days to the right on that, on the upper right, the dryness is more evident, especially in the areas of the Northwest and Northeast that are currently showing as D2 or severe drought, and that's kind of why. The wetness in Laramie County is evident at both the 30 and 60-day time frames. The 1-year picture there at the lower right shows neutral conditions, not wet or dry across the western half of the state, and it's showing the continued or increased dryness across the eastern half, and that's been steadily increasing as we look at each week's iteration of the yearly process there. So average minimum temperature, upper right there. Upper 30s and above for most of the entire state, with the upper 30s and low 40s being pretty much confined to the very high elevations and the upper Green Basin. The southern Wind Basin, along with the Bighorn and Powder Tongue basins, saw lows in the mid-50s for the last week, 2 weeks actually, as did the western or eastern plains. The rest of the state, typically about 50 degrees, plus or minus a degree or two here and there for nighttime lows. Go down and do minimum departures. Those are down there on the lower left. Highest in the Tetons and along the winds, along eastern Carbon, most of Albany counties, departures there 4 degrees or more above normal. On the negative departure side, Crook County stands out at 1 to 3 degrees below normal, along with parts of Natrona County and a few other scattered areas around the map. The gray areas on the map are regions that saw minimum temperatures that were within a degree of normal over the last 14 days. Going to maximum temperatures, the high temperatures, daytime highs over the last 2 weeks. Again, up there on the upper right is the actual thermometer values or temperatures. Been pretty warm across much of the state, with the low to mid elevations coming in, daytime highs in the mid 80s to lower to mid 90s. Even the high values, flanks of the mountains had highs going into the low 80s, while the mountains were well into the 60s. Looking at that in terms of a departure from normal down there, again on the lower left, the winds, part of the west, along with south central, southwestern parts of the state, 1 to 2 degrees above normal, with most of that area being less than 2 degrees above normal. Bighorn Basin and areas to the west were up to 4 degrees below normal, although the bulk of that area was between 1 and 3 degrees below normal. The remainder of the state generally came in plus or minus 1 degree of normal. Soil moisture continues to deteriorate, unfortunately, again, especially in the northeast and west. We've had an area in the far northwest, along with a blob in Weston County now at the lowest percentile range, at 0 to 2 percentile. The north central part of Wyoming it's remained roughly the same over the last 2 weeks. In fact, a little bit of improvement over there in the Powder River, where you see that yellow expanding a little bit further to the east. But Sublette, Fremont County, as well as the areas to their southwest have gotten worse. There's also been a slight improvement in far southern Laramie County, as you might expect, with some of the precip that's been seen in that area over the last little while. And we'll close things out here with the vegetation response index. The current depiction there on the right is showing that conditions are fairly similar to what they were 2 weeks ago, which is that map there on the left. The area in northern Albany County, going over a little bit into Platte County, that area showed some deterioration last month, and it's continuing to decline this month compared to where we were even 2 weeks ago, although probably not as bad of a change in the last 2 weeks as there was before. Bighorn Mountains and the Bighorn Basin are also showing as a little poorer now compared to where they were 2 weeks ago. And then like last month, when it comes up here, there's again not a whole lot to say on the vegetation on the right compared to where we were a year ago there on the left. At a state view, when you look at the entire state, there doesn't seem to be any areas now that are better than they were a year ago. But on the flip side of that, there's a whole lot of areas that are doing a lot worse than they were last year. Is pretty obvious to see. There's not a whole lot of green on the map there on the right compared to where we were on the last year on the left there when it was looking a lot better. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS, and we'll go into surface water conditions. Aaron?
Thanks, Tony. So here we are, middle of August, and just taking a snapshot look at real-time stream flow from the National Water Information Dashboard, and I'll just run through the percentiles. So a green dot is the 25th to the 75th percentile. So that's the flow for the day compared to, or the real-time flow compared to an average for the day. So if it falls within that range, it's considered normal. The orange is below normal, the 10th to the 24th percentile. And then luckily we don't have any much below normal or all-time lows, but that would be below the 10th or below. And then a green or a blue dot is above normal, the 75th to the 90th percentile. So got a fair amount of green on the map. And then some higher flows from recent rains that are kind of showing above normal right now. So going on to the next slide. So this hydrograph here, the vertical axis is it's a 7-day average flow in millimeters. So it's kind of a flow per land area, but that a little different than what's normally presented, but we won't get hung up on that. The point of this is to show that in general that where we are is we're in the middle of summer. It's a time of flow recession, in that looking at this amalgamation of different gauges across the state, it's showing that after runoff things have been drier and we've moved into the 25th percentile or less, and kind of focusing on that black line there. One thing to kind of keep in mind if you're kind of bouncing around and looking at one of these dot maps, either Water Watch or the National Information Dashboard, is to keep the statistics in mind. If something's got a shorter period of record, it's more likely to show maybe a higher flow if it's been raining, like showing that it's well above average, or if it's got a low flow, it could be more likely to show something very low. So kind of keep that in mind if you're looking at a gauge and it's got a shorter period of record or longer period of record. And then this is generally a time of not abundant water supply. So if you have above average flows right now, it's really not a lot of water. It's certainly beneficial to any water users or fish and wildlife right now, but it's certainly not going to make up for runoff that didn't come for the water year. So moving on. Okay, so just to take a look at what flows have been doing, this is a product from Water Watch. It's an average of the last 28 days across the states. So most sites that are normal, they're near or below the median, so they're below that kind of central indicator for normal flows, and then kind of looking to the west, the west and the northwest, you got a fair amount of sites that are below the 25th percentile. So you kind of see a difference when you're looking at a real-time snapshot. You'll see the benefits of recent rain, but that tends to move through the system pretty quickly. And taking a look at the 28-day average gives you a better idea of what conditions really have been over the past month of summer. So things are generally below the median to below 25th percentile in the western part of the state in a lot of these gauges. And, you know, there's a mix of regulation too in there that can kind of alter things, but that's kind of a general overview of what it's been doing here. And then just to bounce around to a couple hydrographs to look at where we are. So here we are in the North Fork of the Shoshone at Wapiti. Since runoff, things have been in that normal range, but it's been pretty close to the 25th percentile. So it's been pretty low flows, and they stayed there pretty consistently through July in here into the middle of August. So things are in without kind of a lot more rain or frequent rain, it's probably going to continue to do that until we have a significant change in the weather. Moving over to the middle fork of the Powder, a lower elevation site. Here we see that things have been a bit closer to the median, had pretty good runoff conditions, and then post runoff has been near the median. And then here in the last few days, it's been receiving some rain, and flows have been up into that above normal to close to much above normal. So it's seeing some benefit of local precipitation there. So things look a bit better on the middle fork of the Powder right now. Bumping over to the North Platte above Seminole Reservoir. Pretty normal conditions coming into runoff and near runoff, and then things have been kind of falling below the median and closer to the 25th percentile, and recently just dipped below that. And then you're seeing a bit of a bump in flow here recently, things coming back up a bit. And then moving over to the Green River at Warren Bridge. Post runoff flows have been below the 25th percentile and just kind of hanging there for quite some bit, and then a little bit of a bump in flow recently, but flows are still pretty low in that site. So just a quick look here next at reservoirs across the state. Overall, just a general decrease in storage, as you would expect, as it's a time where you would be releasing water for irrigation or other uses. Major reservoirs in the Northwest are about 70 to 90% full. And overall, there hasn't been a large decrease in storage from the last time we spoke here. But the Northwest reservoirs, 70, 90% full, and reservoirs elsewhere in the state, the Northeast to the Southeast, are 40 to 80% full. So a little less storage in that part of the state. So with that, that's all I have. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Aaron. And now we have Michelle Hubbard, who's with the State Engineer's Office, to give us an update on Surface Water Rights Administration. Michelle?
Right. All right. So just to start off, this map shows the 4 water divisions in the state, and they are set by drainages. So Division 1 is mostly the North Platte. Division 2, Bighorn Basin and some Cheyenne drainage. I'm sorry, it's not Bighorn, it's the Powder River and the Belle Fourche. I apologize. Division 3 is Bighorn, and then Division 4 is mostly the Green River drainage, as well as Bear Creek and Snake River. It's Bear River, sorry. And we have 4 division superintendents, and that contact information is all on there and also on our website. All right, next slide, Tony. So I'm just going to walk through each division and list the ongoing regulation. And I have updated these slides so that anything that's completely bold and italicized are new since the last presentation. So currently the Laramie River, Soldier Creek, Horse Creek, Collin Creeks, and Sand Creek have had ongoing regulation, and those priority dates are listed. And if you go to the next one, this will show the newer creeks under regulation. So we have the Laramie River. The Laramie River has multiple regulations because of the court decree associated with that district. So again, So it shows up multiple times. We also have Horseshoe Creek in District 3, regulated back to 1879 and 1880, and then the Laramie River in District 3 regulated to 1881. And so those are the newer streams and districts under regulation in Division 1. And moving to Division number 2, so Swaim is regulated to 2001, Little Goose Creek back to 1883, and then Belle Fourche is regulated for compact compliance. Those have been existing since the last meeting, and the next slide should show new streams. So the North Fork Powder River in District 8 and the Piney Creek in District 11 have been under regulation, but they're mostly just for moving reservoir water. There's also Piney Creek regulated back to 1885, Clear Creek regulated back to 1883, and Big Goose Creek regulated to 1882. Moving on to this Division number 3. Again, these are all streams that have been under regulation for a couple of months at this point, with Bennett, Little Rock, South Fork, Owl Creek, Grable River, Owl Creek, and Gooseberry Creek. And then the next slide will show our new ones. So Medicine Lodge in District 12 is regulated back to 1906. Paint Creek Lodge is regulated back to 1904, and then the Middle Poposia River is back to 1877. And finally, in Division number 4, Coral Creek in District 9, Blacks Fork River in District 15, South Piney in District 10, Bear River, and the Smiths Fork have all been under regulation for majority of the summer. There were a couple new additions for the Bear River for 1886 and 1878. Again, that's all regulated per compact, and so those are kind of a lot of moving dates to meet our compact obligations. And so the last one, the new streams under regulation in Division 4 are Burnt Fork Creek, regulated back to 1901. Teton Creek is being regulated per the Roxana Decree. West Beaver Creek is regulated back to 1882. And then we have the Central Bear River, which is regulated per the Bear River Compact. So it's when there's not a lot of water and it's been dry and hot, there's definitely a lot more creeks under regulation. So that is all I have for you.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, now let's take a look at some forecasts and outlooks. And for that, we'll go to Tony Anderson with the National Weather Service over in Cheyenne.
Good morning or afternoon, I guess it is, everyone. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist here in Cheyenne. I'm going to be taking you through some of the weather outlooks and some of the weather hazards that we're going to be looking at over the next month or so. Our first slide is just a calendar, basically, of weather hazards that are most common in the state. And I noticed as I was putting this slide together, we're kind of moving into the happy time in Wyoming where there are minimal hazards. There are some fire weather is obviously a concern. If we keep getting rain, that will be minimized. We're moving out of the river and flash flooding area, and the thunderstorms and severe thunderstorms are diminishing, although we have had some nice rain recently. As the monsoon diminishes, we'll be losing those. I did see some ugly things there with high wind and winter storm. We're by the end of this time period, by mid-September, we will be facing the possibility of both of those creatures, no matter how much we don't want them to come back for the time period. So if we can move ahead, we'll move to the outlooks. Our 7-day precipitation forecast is quite unremarkable. And I told Wendy and Tony earlier that when I updated these slides, I had to change very little from 1 month ago. And this was another one where I didn't change much of the text. There's no large systems coming through. We're going to be looking at localized precipitation from afternoon thunderstorms. We're kind of in the mix of the regular convection and the monsoon, but we're not going to have a lot of monsoon moisture to work with over the next 7 days. So we're not going to be seeing a lot of the gully washers that we've had down in the southeast recently. It will probably be more spotty and streaky than this map indicates. And we're really, I mean, there's a 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch down there in Uinta County. The rest of it's going to be relatively unremarkable rainfall over the course of the next 7 days. Next slide, please. Looking out to the 8 to 14 day outlooks again here. I messed up the dates there. I forgot to update the dates. That's actually supposed to be July 5th or July 23rd to the 28th or 29th, or August 22nd to the 28th. So anyway, these are the images are updated. I apologize for that. Looking at the temperature map on the left, we do have a fairly significant signal for above normal temperatures over that time period. I mean, the second week from now, we have a moderate signal in the north and a strong signal in the south. So fairly confident that we're going to be looking at higher than normal temperatures. Looking on the precipitation side, we have almost no signal at all. So your best forecast would be for near normal precipitation over that time period. Have a little above normal signal in the extreme south central, but barely enough to talk about. So overall for the state, probably looking at near normal conditions. Next slide, please. Looking at the 1 month outlook, I did update this date. This is for September. Looking at the monthly temperature outlook and the precipitation outlook, they look fairly similar to the 8 to 14 day outlook. Although on the temperature side, the signal has strengthened. We have a moderate signal in the north part of the state, and we have a very strong signal in the southern part of the state. So there's fairly high confidence that we're going to be looking at above normal temperatures over the course of September. The precipitation outlook shows a weak signal across almost the entire state, and it strengthens from the north, from a no signal in the northwest to a almost moderate signal in the southeast. But most of the state is covered in that light tan, that I call a weak signal for below normal precipitation over the course of this month of September. So not a strong signal, but it's there, and it strengthens as you go southeast. Next slide, please. There we go. We've now moved out to a 3-month outlook for September, October, November, basically the fall time frame. And here again, they look relatively similar to the 1 month outlook in September. We have a weak signal in the northeast for temperature, above normal temperatures. It increases in intensity as you move to the south and southwest. We go through a moderate signal to a very strong signal over almost half the state. So, or not a very strong, but a strong signal over most of half the state. So once again, we have relatively high confidence in continued above normal temperatures. And the precipitation outlook looks fairly similar to the last one, in that most of the state is covered by a weak below normal precipitation signal. We have no signal in the extreme north and the northwest, and that strengthens as you move south into a below normal signal. It's almost getting into the moderate range, but not quite. So once again, look for above normal temperatures and near to possibly below normal precipitation over the next 3 months. I believe that's everything I have for you, Tony.
That looks like everything you have for us, Tony. All right, thanks. So next we'll go to Chase Lane, who's with the Bureau of Land Management, to look at the wildland fire potential.
Thanks, Tony. I mean, as we look back to the last presentation, I'm sure a bunch of you saw news articles about some of the fires that happened around the state. In last presentation, we talked a lot about how we're moving into high fire danger. We're at a point now where, as we go through this, you'll see that some conditions have moderated, and I like to call this halftime. So a lot of factors can change between now and the end of fire season. So just caveat of everything I show you today is looking at just the last couple days of moisture that we've received. So it may show that we've moderated, but we're not out of fire season yet. So with that, some of the key factors that we look at when determining fire severity is fuel moisture content, or how much water are in our fuels. And we have two different kinds of fuels. We have live fuels and dead fuels that we look at. A common live fuel that we analyze in Wyoming for fire severity is sagebrush. When we're live fuels, we go out, take little clippings, measure how much water is in them by weighing them. Then we dry those fuels and weigh them again and determine what percentage of that is water. Then we analyze dead fuels, and a lot of our dead fuels we do analyze in the same way, but a lot of this is also through modeling and through our remote automated weather stations. So some examples of our dead fuels are 1 hour fuels are going to be your cured grasses or your timber litter in terms of dead pine needles. 10-hour fuels, small twigs and branches off trees. 100-hour fuels are going to be some of those larger branches, and 1,000-hour fuels are going to be kind of like your slash blow down, large dead timber pockets. And then with that, when it comes to suppressing fires and fire danger, we got to look at fuel loading, because that plays a large factor in how successful we can be in putting those fires out. We move to the next slide, Tony. Thank you. This month I did something a little different, and I threw last month's chart kind of in the bottom right-hand corner just so you could compare. So this is looking at the North Fork of the Powder, that Sheridan, Campbell County area. As you know, last month we had some pretty big fires in that area, kind of right around the same time as we had the presentation. And if you look, we were up there close to the red, set a couple maximums, and then we received some moisture, and you can see that we've really dropped off since then. I do want to say that the blue line is going to fluctuate a lot more than the red line. The red line is going to be our maximum for every day that this has been taken. So we can, our blue line can climb as quick as it drops. So the weather, environmental factors, and the moisture we receive over the next week or so are going to kind of determine that trend. On the next slide, we're going to look at the 1,000-hour fuel moisture, just to kind of show you another perspective of this. So we were setting maximums for our lows in our 1,000-hour fuels. We received some moistures, and that jumped back up. As we move forward in the summer, we're kind of expecting it to get hot and dry again, decrease in monsoonal moisture. So you should expect that to start trending back down. Probably not going to be setting maximums or minimums in this case, but at least below the average and possibly in those 90th and 95th percentiles. Jumping around the state on the next slide, I think we look at the Shoshone. And I think there might be a delay in the slides changing. Okay, awesome. So if you look at last month in the bottom right corner, we were above the 90th percentile, trending right around or above average. We trended up a little bit and then received some moisture, and we've dropped down. We're below average right now. Again, hotter and drier, we'll change that. Next slide, please, Tony. So you're going to see a lot of the same trends here. So looking at the high desert area, southwest corner, we're trending above the 90th, poked above the 95th percentile or 97th percentile, and then started to trend lower again. We can jump to the next one. Looking at Medicine Bow, kind of that Wyoming, Colorado border area. They didn't set maximums this year so far. They definitely trended up, had some high fire danger days, but you also have seen they haven't dropped as below the average as much either. So definitely trended down a little bit over the last month, but not as much as some of the other places we've looked. And then our final one that we look at is going to be the bighorns. So you can see they're trending above the 97th percentile, high fire danger, and they probably have had one of the steepest drop-offs in comparison to the other places we analyzed. But then you can see they've already started that drying as well. You can see they've started to pivot back up. I'd expect over the next couple weeks or month, they're going to be at or above that average. Next slide, please, Tony. So then we'll just go into some bigger picture fire danger. Not much of this has changed since last month. They're still expecting that Pacific Northwest and the Great Basin, Northern California area to have some significant fire danger for August, and that's going to go into September. Also that Oklahoma and Northern Texas. And then October on the next slide. That's kind of where you start thinking about the end of fire season generally. You start seeing some more fires in that Southern California, and those often run towards Thanksgiving time. But they're expecting normal fire danger for most of the country, minus Southern California, and then that Texas, Oklahoma, and a little bit of Arizona and New Mexico. And then the last couple months, I talked about the hot, dry, windy index. I just want to start kind of throwing in other options in there so you can look at some fire danger if you guys are curious. So I just pulled this today off the Casper Interagency Dispatch site, and it shows like fire adjective rating. So Smokey's Arm that you'd see on the forests, low, medium, high, very high, extreme fire danger. And then there's a map that correlates with. So Casper Dispatch manages basically the east half of the state, and then that lower elevation along the I-80 corridor. If you're in one of those parts, like the Bighorn Basin or the Teton area, you can look up Cody Interagency Dispatch Center or Teton Interagency Dispatch Center, and they're going to have something very similar to this. With that, when you look at these fire dangers, they're going to be less exact in that they're looking at a large area. So you can see, if you look at the east fire area, it's basically the whole east half of the state showing moderate fire behavior. But they're pulling that data from only a few data sets of our weather stations. So some of those weather stations may have received rain, but that whole area didn't receive rain. Just a good general fire danger rating. I think that's all I got, Tony.
All right. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you.
And for this month's special feature or highlight of the month, we have Jerry Swanson with the National Weather Service in Riverton to talk about the NWS's new drought information statements. Go ahead, Jerry.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here today. Go ahead and hit the slide there for me. So the drought information statement, I know we have a lag in these slides. It's kind of funny. The drought information statement, and we call it DGT, is kind of the acronym that we use for it, has been around for a long time as a text product. Very time consuming every month. It was our hydrologist and then my predecessor it would take them 2 to 3 hours to go through all of the different slides and all the different websites and to write up these text bulletins that they sent out. And if you just click the slide, a couple of slides, just looking at how text it was. This first paragraph talks about the D1, D2s, and then the next one was the temperature information for the region. And then after that, the hydro, and then a synopsis. So just very, very text oriented, 3 pages long if you print it out. Just a lot of data. You can see there's just like page 2 and 3. So it was huge, very, very, very long product. So in 2023, initiative started at the VLab program to create a graphical version of the DGT product, the Drought Information Statement. So this new version, when it comes out to you, it comes out in a PDF format, but it's based on a standardized template that's designed first to reduce the burden for the forecasters creating the product every month, to incorporate graphics, which people love to see the picture versus just reading the words. So very important. And it enables collaboration with neighboring offices. We're able to look at other offices and see what they're looking at in their drought information statement. Go ahead. Next. So the product itself is set up as a Google slide presentation. So pretty much anyone in my office can open up the presentation, work on it. And there's a nice button you push that you click the button and it updates all the slides, all the graphic pictures in the entire slideshow. So then we can go through each of the slides and update the text to reflect the current conditions that are shown in the slides that have already been updated. One advantage of this drought product is that the order of slides and the data that we present is universal across weather offices. All the offices are using this exact same template, the exact same order. So no matter where you pull it up, it's going to be a very familiar product for you. Depending on the location, the time of year, and actual conditions, some of the slides may be skipped when not necessary. If we don't need temperatures or long-term stuff, we're going to skip those slides for the monthly presentation. Next. This bulletin is not a required to be created on any regular schedule. A lot of offices will do it once a month. Our office tries to do it the second and fourth Thursdays. But if D3 conditions are reported, extreme drought, then it becomes a mandatory product for the weather office to submit. And like I said, it's sent out as a PDF in that graphics version, but we also send out a text product that you can read as well. And all of these drought information statements are available on the Drought.gov webpage. And I'm going to show you how to get to that on the next slide. So if you go to Drought.gov, this is their homepage, and you see the data and maps drop-down menu, and you click on the drought impacts, and then it will bring you up to this nice map on the next slide. And on the map, you can see all of those little eye information icons. Those are all active drought information statements. So if there's an eye over an office, they have a current statement out. The other choice you have is down at the bottom. There is that section where you can actually use a drop down and pick the name of the station and either click to view the PDF graphics or the text statement. But like I said, when you pull up this map, you can pull up any drought information statement that's current across the country. And there's actually links to Alaska, to Guam, to Hawaii as well from this map. So it's really kind of cool. If you want to look at another office, another area of the country, you can. Next slide, please. Here in Wyoming, if you go to our webpage, weather.gov/Riverton, on the right hand, on the top menu, you'll see a drop down for climate and past weather. And if you hover over that, you'll see the drought information statement, and you just click on that, and it will open the statement up for you. And this is from our webpage. It opens up our page. So when you click on that drought information statement block, it opens the next page. And basically you have at the top is the PDF, which is the graphical format. then there's a link to the text format, and then the lower part is the past statements. So we show all the archive statements is there. So if you want to go back and look at a statement from a few months ago, you can. They're available on this page as well. So that's just two different ways that you can get to the drought information statements. And then the next slide I'm going to show you is just, I'm just going to take you really quickly through some of the slides that we have. So go ahead. The first slide is kind of nice. It basically, the bottom part of it is where we put in any highlights for the month. And we show, of course, we show you when it's going to be updated, and it gives you some links to the main pages. But it gives you the highlights for this current statement, and those will change each month. Slide. And then the next slide is, here we go. So here's that first part of the text part. It shows you the different stages. The right-hand side is the map, obviously, and the left hand is just the text that gives you a little detail. But it's nice. You can see the graph and the text side by side. Slide. And then here's the 4-week change, where it's gotten worse, gotten better, improved. And then usually there's a reasoning down below that explains why the changes happened. Slide. And then we do the precip accumulations for the 30 days. And same thing, graphics and text. Go ahead, slide. And then we do the temperatures. The left side is the current temperatures for the month. The right side is the change. And again, we put the text, and then there's a link at the top that takes you to the actual maps, the web page where those maps are produced. Slide. The next one, this one here is nice. This is the impact slide where we can go in here and write text updates of the impacts. And this page is actually followed by graphics of the same impacts. So go ahead and we can just click through the slides really quickly. There's your the stream flow graphic. Next slide. And this is the crop information, agriculture information. Go ahead, slide. Next one I think is the fire land. The fire. This is one you just saw, actually, the fire danger one. And this is one we haven't been using because we haven't had any drought or any fire in our area. Next one, there's your precip outlook. Same thing you saw earlier on our presentation, just showing the 7-day outlook for precip. Next slide. And there's the outlook for temperatures. And you might see a monthly outlook here, or you might see the 3-month seasonal outlook in this section, depending on which one is more prevalent. And if there's a big change. Go ahead. And then once again, there's the drought outlook. And you can see at the bottom left, there's actually links to the page where those graphics come from. Slide. So like I said, so that's basically what the drought impact now looks like. Instead of seeing a whole bunch of words over 3 and 4 pages, you actually are seeing these beautiful graphics with the text to help explain the graphics. Not every office issues them, and they may issue them once a month, twice a month, even once a week, depending on the product and the changes in the drought conditions. Slide. These next 2 slides are just, these are some of the data sources where those graphics come from. Drought.gov is a big one. The University of Nebraska is the big one, though. Droughtmonitor.unl. We get a lot of good slides and information from them. And the next slide is just a few more of the sites. You can see the Climate Prediction Center, where we get our temperature and precip outlooks. The Climate Center, High Plains Regional Climate. USDA, where we get our crop information, and of course the Fire Center. So a lot of different sources. And I actually put in the chat a link that takes you directly to ours, and you'll see in that link the DGT_river RIW. That's where that DGT kind of comes from. It's our shortcut, but it's also in that actual email. And that's all I've got. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Thanks, Jerry. And thanks to all our presenters who are listed on the slide here. And we're 1 minute over, so I'll turn it back over to Wendy.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Tony. And I know we are a minute over, but I want to thank all of our presenters as well as all of the attendees for logging on today and going through some of those technical lags with us. I know we have one question that came in the webinar. So I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll ask the question and see if our presenter is able to stay on and answer it for the attendee. And if others are able to stay on, you're welcome to stay on and we'll take a couple questions if we're able to, but don't feel obligated by any means for presenters or attendees.